The afternoon wind whipped up a haze of copper-red dust as the stagecoach rattled to a halt in front of the Copperjack Saloon. Belle Rowan stepped down her blue traveling dress already streaked with Arizona grit. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Reaching for her bonnet, a dainty piece of Eastern fashion, she felt the desert wind snatch it and tumble it toward a stand of prickly pear. A commotion broke out before she even turned a calf trailing a frayed rope bolted from between two false front buildings and skidded into the square. A lean cowboy swung down in one smooth motion. Clay Maddox caught the rope boots carving furrows in the dust as he hauled the animal to a stop. In the scramble, his spur snagged Belle's stage trunk, sending it flying open. Face powder puffed up like pale smoke. Ostrich feathers floated like winter snow. Brightly colored handbills, Eastern Nightingale Tonight, skittered across Main Street, while laughter rolled off the saloon porch. Belle felt her cheeks burn equal parts irritation and stage-trained poise. Snapping open a broken fan, she dropped a theatrical curtsy, salvaging dignity from the mess. Clay crouched to gather the runaway props, his voice dry as sun-baked mesquite. "My apologies, ma'am. Cattle don't much care who's watchin'." Later that day, Belle wrestled with the stubborn town pump, the handle locked tight. Clay stepped beside her calloused hand covering hers. "Let me," he said, eyes sliding away. Together, they worked the handle in a rough rhythm until water finally burst out, soaking them both and breaking the awkwardness with shared laughter. That evening, Belle climbed the tiny stage of the Copperjack. Her ballad floated through smoke and whiskey fumes while lamplight threw restless shadows on plank walls. Clay sat in back, still as a stone among miners and drifters. Through the haze, she caught the winter blue of his eyes, steady and distant. When she finished, saloon keeper Jack Whitman sidled up with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Why not mingle with the big spenders?" he suggested. Before Belle could answer, Clay appeared silent, unarmed, yet immovable, until the prospector slunk away, cursing. Later, they shared a late supper of corn stew and strong coffee at Hattie Briggs's cafe. Belle spoke of her long trail west and the theaters she'd left behind. Clay asked few questions, but each cut to the heart. "Did you come by choice, or did trouble drive you?" he asked. She stirred her coffee, then said quietly, "I chose to stay until I've saved enough to choose again." Back in her cramped dressing room, Belle unpacked and chuckled at a broken comb laced with calf hair, a souvenir of their dusty introduction. Outside, the desert night stretched like black velvet sprinkled with silver dust, carrying the scent of sage and rust, the perfume of a land both fierce and beautiful. Morning revealed Red Butte, sun-baked storefronts with peeling paint, a crooked steepled church, a forge ringing beneath hammer blows. Jed and Nora Carver's general store sat behind cloudy windows. May Hollis advertised alkaline noodles. Yaqui shelters clustered by the dry creek cultures, stitched together by survival. The drought had dragged on for 3 scorching months. Sandstorms buried porches and shrieked through every crack, nights icy as well-water days burning like a blacksmith's forge. Clay slept in the livery loft beside his aging gray mare Cinder, while Belle rented a small room over a fabric shop where the wind drummed a rough tune on the tin roof. She set firm rules: no drinking with customers, no backroom rendezvous. Her smile kept strictly professional. Clay's own rule was simpler: steer clear of other folks' troubles, especially those carried by women who smiled through pain. Rumors of the San Dimas silver mine thickened like storm clouds. More accidents. More graves. Folks said Marshal Hank Rourke kept order, while Pinkerton agents hired by distant bosses spread a shadow of cold authority across the desert. Character showed in small moments. Clay spoke only when needed, letting deeds come first. Belle turned insults into laughter and wore endurance like armor. Yet when lamps burned low, each nursed wounds no desert wind could scour away. On a quiet Sunday, Belle taught letters to Luke Porter, the blacksmith's boy, while Clay fixed a squeaky hinge outside. The child's eyes traveled between the painted stars on the saloon ceiling and the silent cowboy beyond the doorway, two mysteries equally grand. Market day arrived in a whirl of color. Navajo traders bartered leather for cornmeal. Mexican farmers built bright pyramids of peppers and squash. Belle bought a worn cloth doll from a vendor and stitched its seams right there, earning a shy smile from a Yaqui girl. Clay kept watch at Hattie's cafe, his steady presence discouraging drinkers itching for trouble. They learned to share the same harsh country, like two planets circling one relentless sun. When a dust storm stole Belle's voice, Clay brewed bitter sage tea and told her not to sing. She ignored him, speaking her songs instead, forcing the rowdy crowd to lean in. For the first time, she saw Clay's hard face soften into a true smile. During tense talks over scarce water between rival ranchers, Clay Maddox crouched in the dust and sketched neat borders with a stick, setting a fair rotation for the little spring that still trickled. Belle Rowan followed behind with tidy handwriting, turning those rough marks into signed agreements, frontier law sealed in dirt and ink. Behind the hotel stood an old bathhouse with a cantankerous boiler. One steamy night, Belle slipped inside for a long soak, only to find the swollen door jammed. Her shouts echoed until Clay arrived, forcing the latch with the calm of a man used to stubborn wood and wilder storms. Both came out red-faced from heat and surprise, their laughter chasing away any awkwardness. They'd kept their lives separate, yet something between them shifted like dunes in a desert wind. One moonless night, wolves sang at the rim of Red Butte. Belle shivered, though the air was warm. Next morning, she found a small knife at her door, wrapped with a note in Clay's careful hand. "Keep under your pillow for peace of mind." When she teased, "What if I stab you by mistake?" Clay only said, "Then I'll know you still aim to live." And in his eyes, she glimpsed an understanding of that private fight. Red Butte's everyday heroes slowly stepped from the dust. Hattie Briggs, all grit and welcome, kept her cafe doors open to every soul. Noah Pike, a widowed miner, sent half his pay across the ocean to family he might never see again. Jed and Nora Carver, with their children Eli and June, stayed kind, though debt nipped at their heels. Each neighbor bore a quiet load of hardship, grief, and stubborn hope. Together, they shaped Red Butte into more than a raw settlement. It was becoming a living portrait of endurance and second chances. Between Belle and Clay, something unnamed took root. A coat he left on her stair when the wind turned bitter, a scrap of poetry she slipped into his tobacco pouch. No hurried promises, just a steady flame in the desert night. Red dust coated every shirt, every dream. Yet at dusk, when the mesas blazed orange and violet, Belle often lingered on the saloon porch, watching Clay work the horses, and wondered if choosing to stay might be its own kind of freedom. Clay's past lay far to the east. Born to a Missouri schoolteacher and a blacksmith who prized honest labor and quiet faith, he'd saddled up with the cavalry at 18, lured by the call of adventure. The army taught him to read the desert like a Bible, every hidden spring, every shadow where danger might wait. He learned to track by a single turned stone, to find water by a bird's flight, to live on hardtack and grit. But the winter of '89 marked him forever. Leading a patrol through the Sangre de Cristo range, he misread the sky and led his men straight into a killer blizzard. When the storm cleared, 2 soldiers lay still and white as marble faces, calm as sleeping children. Clay held them as the cold stole their breath, powerless. The guilt cut deeper than any frostbite. He left the army with honors on paper, but scars no doctor could mend. For 12 long winters, he drifted, talking more to horses than to people, as if speech itself might stir the ghosts who rode with him. Belle's road began in a Boston brownstone, where girls were trained to sing demure hymns. Her voice refused to stay small. She found the stage where feelings burned bright and applause fed her spirit. But theater kingdoms belonged to men who punished defiance. When she spurned a powerful producer's advances, his lies shut respectable doors in her face. Desperate, she signed on with a traveling troupe run by a smooth talker who vanished with their earnings, leaving Belle stranded in Red Butte. Nights by candlelight, she copied Shakespeare and Whitman into a worn leather journal, whispering, "I contain multitudes," whenever the West felt too wide and she too small. The town itself sprawled like a crooked question mark along the old stage line, false fronts leaning for support, a mercantile with shelves half bare, an assay office where fortunes were weighed and usually found wanting. Florence Nightingale kept a boarding house with iron rules and paper-thin walls. May Hollis ladled alkaline noodles that somehow filled half the camp. On the desert's edge, the Yaqui pitched their seasonal camp older than any claim or map. The land had baked hard as pottery. Dust devils spun drunken dances down Main Street. The creek bed stayed dry so long, children played tag in it, kicking up clouds that turned the sunset blood red. When night fell, buckets iced over, and scorpions crawled into boots for warmth. Heavy clouds scraped across the mesas without spilling a drop. Clay slept in the hayloft of the livery, breathing in the honest scent of horses. His 17-year-old mare, Cinder, matched his patience stride for stride. He talked to her while brushing her coat, saying things he would never risk with people. Belle rented a narrow room above Morrison's fabric shop, where the tin roof became a drum each time the wind rose. She lay awake through the metallic symphony, guarding her independence with quiet steel. Any miner who pressed too close met a quick-witted jest and a cool smile. She never drank with customers, knowing liquor blurred the lines she meant to keep. Clay built his own walls out of silence and regret, stone by stone. And behind those walls, the lonesome cowboy and the bold singer carried wounds the desert itself could not erase. He kept his distance from attachments, especially women, whose smiles might mean everything or nothing. Yet something about Belle Rowan's grit, the way she carried herself with quiet pride, kept tugging at Clay Maddox like a compass finding true north. Word of trouble at the San Dimas silver mine spread like prairie fire. The company's slick men from Chicago showed up in black suits, eyes cold as ledgers, and took rooms at the hotel. Their arrival was a hard reminder that law and justice didn't always ride the same trail. Soon the mine saw a rash of accident shafts caving in, poisoned air, broken gear, always where miners had dared talk wages and safety. The workers started a burial fund, passing the hat at the Copperjack every Saturday night. Over at Hattie Briggs' cafe, she kept careful books with a hand as steady as Sunday prayer. In these hard times, a person's character showed in daily choices. Clay lived by economy of motion, speaking only when needed, never reaching for his gun when the strength of his presence could settle a fight. He simply appeared when trouble brewed steady as the red rock mesas that ringed the town. Belle had the gift of transformation. She could turn a drunk's insult into a round of applause, keep her dignity even when her stomach knotted from hunger. Yet when the saloon emptied and silence took hold, she would sit at the piano playing tunes, soaked in loneliness deeper than any canyon. Not everyone in Red Butte welcomed her. The town's moral guardians, led by Ruth Deacon, crossed streets rather than meet her eyes. Their children whispered and pointed. Belle met such small cruelties by opening her back porch to teach letters and numbers to any child with courage to come sketching lessons with charcoal when paper ran short. Then the company tightened its grip, posting new rules: no gatherings over 5, no songs after 10, no seditious talk about wages. Marshal Hank Rourke enforced the edicts fast, hauling in Amos Burke, a foreman who'd questioned mine safety, and Rex Porter, who merely suggested fair pay scales. On a Thursday, Belle received a summons. Inside the sheriff's office, Rourke lounged behind his desk badge, polished bright as his black intentions. He lectured her on morality and community standards, hinting she'd be better off leaving Red Butte. Belle stood motionless, then replied with a voice sweet as honey laced with gunpowder. Martial morality can't be tallied on a ledger or enforced with leather straps. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a show to prepare. That very night, the Nuts 3 shaft collapsed. 3 miners, Zeke, Boone, Wade Flint, and young Cole Nash, died gasping in the dark, while their families waited above. The company called it an act of God. But Hattie, standing beside the bodies grown cold, spoke plain. God doesn't dig rotten tunnels or prop them with bad timbers. Sunday dawned with a solemn hush. Saloons locked their doors, and families donned their least dusty clothes for worship. Belle used the cool morning to teach. Luke Porter, the blacksmith's boy, wrestled with his letters, mixing up B and D until Belle coaxed a laugh from him. Outside, Clay pretended to fix a squeaky hinge, his steady hammering a counterpoint to her patient instruction. B has its belly out front like Mr. Burke. After Sunday dinner, she joked, drawing giggles. Through the window, Clay watched her graceful hands shape letters in the air, the children as riveted as if watching a summer storm. Market day turned Main Street into a bustling river of trade. Navajo artisans spread turquoise and silver that caught the sun. Mexican farmers stacked peppers and corn in neat pyramids. Belle wove through the crowd, drawing stares both warm and wary, until she found a pile of worn cloth dolls. Picking up one with a single button eye, she asked the price in Spanish. The vendor, surprised at her fluent words, named a figure. Belle paid without bargaining, then sat cross-legged in the dust to mend the doll, her needle flashing in and out until the seam was sound. A shy Yaqui girl peeked from behind her mother's skirt and accepted the gift with solemn wonder. Clay, sipping coffee black as midnight at Hattie's cafe, noticed the quiet kindness and filed it away in the vault of things he never said aloud. On Tuesday, a storm rolled in, turning noon into near night. Wind screamed through every crack, flinging fine sand into food beds and lungs. Belle woke, coughing. Her voice rasped to a whisper. Singing was near impossible, but Jack Whitman had made it clear no song meant no pay. That evening, Clay knocked at her door with a steaming cup smelling of sage and something bitter. "Drink," he ordered gently. "Don't sing tonight." "I have to," she whispered. Then don't, he said, simple as a gunshot. But nothing in Red Butte was ever simple. That night, Belle stepped onto the stage and turned necessity into art. Instead of singing, she spoke each song like a spellbound story, drawing the rowdy crowd close, until even the roughest miner leaned in to catch every word. From his usual corner, Clay watched and let a rare smile break across his weathered face. Water in Red Butte was worth more than silver, scarcer than any clean vein underground. A single spring in the red rocks barely trickled enough for folks and stock. Ranchers from miles around rode in to argue water rights voices sharp as spurs as the long drought dragged on. To everyone's surprise, Clay Maddox stepped forward as mediator. Squatting in the courthouse dust, he drew neat lines with a stick and set a fair schedule so each spread could water its herd in turn. Belle Rowan volunteered to write the agreement in her clear, careful hand. Ranchers pressed signatures or rough X's beneath her words, the deal sealed in grit and ink. She caught Clay watching her a flicker of quiet approval in his winter blue eyes. Behind the Cosmopolitan Hotel, a ramshackle bathhouse tried to pass for civilization, its boiler grudgingly giving hot water twice a week. Belle saved 2 weeks' wages for the luxury of a private soak, eager to scrub away the desert's red film. But as she dressed, the swollen door jammed tight. Her calls echoed until boots thudded outside. "Stand back," Clay ordered through the plank. One strong shove, and the door gave. Belle stepped out, cheeks pink from steam and sudden embarrassment, damp curls clinging to her neck. Their eyes met for a heartbeat awareness possibility, maybe a hint of fear, before they both looked away and laughed, the sound rising like startled birds. "Thank you," she managed. "Doors out here don't bother with manners," Clay replied, and Belle wondered if he meant more than wood and hinges. On a moonless night, when wolves cried hunger to the stars, Belle lay awake, the dark pressing against her window, like something alive. Every creak and scurry set her heart racing. At dawn, she found a small package on her threshold, a knife with a carved handle wrapped in leather, and a note in Clay's steady script, "Keep under your pillow for peace of mind." When she thanked him at the stable, she tried to tease. "What if I stab you when you come to fix another door? Then I'll know you still want to live," he said quietly. The words settled between them like a vow. Belle understood he knew the weight of nights when life itself felt too heavy. She slipped the knife into her pocket, its heft a promise to guard the life she was building. As days passed, Red Butte's people took sharper shape. Hattie Briggs ran her cafe with fierce resolve, feeding miners on credit and keeping a spotless ledger. "My man's bones rest in this ground," she said, when urged to leave. "Where else would I go?" Noah Pike toiled the San Dimas day shift, sending half his pay to family back in Punjab. Once, he showed Belle a faded photo of a woman in a sari holding 2 solemn children. "7 more years," he said, "then I bring them here." He practiced English by reading Shakespeare with her, his accent turning the lines into new music. At the general store, Jed and Nora Carver fought to stay afloat, extending credit so no child went hungry. Their youngsters Eli and June learned arithmetic by making change and humanity by watching their parents choose mercy over profit. Pastor Clyde Boone led a modest Catholic flock offering weddings and burials, whether or not coins crossed his palm, sometimes slipping money back into widows' hands with a gentle fib about overpaying for candles. Beyond the dry creek, the Yaqui kept their seasonal camp trading herbs, and weaving baskets, their watchful eyes older than any boundary lines. Some of their children slipped into Belle's back porch lessons, swift to learn yet careful to keep their distance. Life between Belle and Clay found its own rhythm coffee together, when paths crossed brief talk about nothing that meant everything, long silences that said even more. Like desert blooms after rare rain, Their bond deepened only when the time was right. But trouble gathered like thunderheads. On Monday, the San Dimas Mining Company, run by Cyrus Kane, hammered new edicts to posts up and down Main Street. No gatherings of more than 5, no performances after 10, no talk of wages or conditions. It read like a declaration of war. By noon, Marshal Hank Rourke was already making arrests, 2 miners taken in for merely discussing shift schedules outside the assay office. The message was plain. San Dimas claimed not just the mountain, but the very air people breathed. That Thursday, Belle received a curt summons. The sheriff's office reeked of sweat and stale tobacco. Rourke sat behind his desk like a spider in its web badge flashing in the dusty light. "Miss Rowan," he said, without offering a chair, "we need to discuss this town's moral standards." Belle stayed on her feet, face calm as a still pond. "I wasn't aware morality fell under your badge," she answered. His smile spread thin as oil on water. "Everything's my concern when it touches the peace. A woman of your profession invites the wrong crowd. Maybe you'd be happier in Tombstone or Phoenix. I'm quite content here," she said evenly. "My shows end before 10, I pay my rent, and I break no laws." Rourke's eyes narrowed. "Laws can change." "Miss Rowan Marshall." Hank Rourke drawled the chair under him, groaning as he leaned back. "So do definitions of decent behavior. The company is considering new ordinances on public entertainment. Wouldn't want you standing on the wrong side of progress." Belle met his stare without blinking. "Progress is a mighty strange name for what your company drags in. Tell me, Marshal, does progress always demand so many funerals?" His face darkened. "Careful, Miss Rowan. That sounds a lot like sedition." "I only made an observation," she replied evenly. "Surely noticing facts isn't against the law." Belle left with her spine straight, though her hands trembled inside her skirt folds. Outside, Clay Maddox waited by the water trough, busying himself with Cinder's bridle. Without a word, he fell in beside her, his quiet presence, saying plain that she wasn't alone. That night, the mountain itself groaned. A low rumble rolled like far-off thunder, then the mine whistle screamed. San Dimas, number 3 shaft, had caved in. Men burst from other tunnels, black with dust and dread, calling names. 3 never answered Zeke Boone. A freedman who'd chased liberty west, only to find another set of chains. Wade Flint, a Scotsman sending every spare coin to his widowed mother, and Cole Nash, barely 18, saving for his wedding. Through the long, frantic night, miners clawed at rock with bleeding hands when shovels failed. Women kept vigil at the mouth of the shaft, bringing coffee and bread. Belle sang hymns until her throat burned, her voice steady as a church bell. Clay worked with the rescue crew, using old cavalry training to read the treacherous tunnels. By dawn, they broke through too late. Bad air had stilled the men hours before, their faces calm as if asleep. Della Frost collapsed across her husband Zeke's chest, grief echoing through Red Butte like a cracked bell. Young Rose Pike, who'd been planning her wedding to Cole, stood frozen as the truth settled in. The company's verdict came swift and cold, act of God. No liability. Miners work at their own risk. At the graveside, Hattie Briggs spoke the words everyone felt. God doesn't cut corners on timbers or weigh profit over lives. A new figure lingered at the funeral's edge. Finn Doyle, a Pinkerton agent freshly arrived. Pale eyes unblinking, he jotted notes as if grief itself might be a crime. His silent scrutiny chilled the mourners. Suspicion toward Belle sharpened after she sang for the dead. Ruth Deacon, The banker's wife led a morality committee passing a petition to bar improper women from teaching children. Fear of San Dimas's power fed their signatures more than faith ever could. Still, Belle kept her Sunday lessons. Attendance thinned, but Luke Porter and a few steadfast pupils came eager for the Shakespeare tales she reshaped for young minds, hungry for a world larger than Red Butte's dusty streets. One afternoon, Finn Doyle strode into the Copperjack during rehearsal. He circled the room, eyes measuring doors and windows, then approached the stage. "Miss Rowan," he said with a chill smile, enjoying our town's hospitality. "As much as anyone can enjoy a place where singing past 10 is treated like a hanging offense," she answered. "Clever women sometimes forget cleverness has a price," he said softly. "A woman alone with no kin or guard accidents happen in mining towns." Before she could reply, Clay stepped from the shadows near the bar. He said nothing, made no threat, only planted himself between Belle and the agent. Finn tipped his hat. Mr. Maddox still playing guardian angel. Careful wings burn easy in desert heat. Then he slipped out, leaving a chill in his wake. Belle realized her hands were shaking. Clay poured whiskey from Jack Whitman's private bottle and set the glass in front of her. "Drink," he said. "I don't drink with— You're not on stage. Drink." The liquor scorched her throat but steadied her spirit. "He threatened me," she whispered. "Yes. What do I do?" Clay studied her, then said, "Exactly what you've been doing. Live, sing, teach. Don't let them shrink you." After a pause, he added, "And maybe keep that knife closer than your pillow." A week later, the sky itself turned predator. A wall of red dust loomed on the horizon, roaring like Judgment Day. Animals knew. First horses, pawed dogs, howled birds vanished. Then the storm hit, slamming shutters and ramming grit through every crack. Inside Hattie's cafe, a dozen townsfolk huddled, barely able to see across the room. In the chaos, young Cody Hart, the telegraph boy, slipped from his mother's grasp. Through the storm's howl, Clay caught faint cries and plunged outside, guided only by instinct and prayer. He found the child pressed against a wall, face streaked with muddy tears. Wrapping Cody in his coat, Clay fought back through the screaming dust, emerging like a phantom of red earth. Belle took the boy from his arms, wiping grit from his face, as his mother wept with relief. Then she reached up to brush dirt from a cut on Clay's forehead. "Heroic," she murmured. "Foolish," he countered, though he didn't move from her gentle touch. By the next morning, as Red Butte dug itself free of sand and silence, Marshal Rourke strode out with a fresh list of arrests. 5 miners now faced charges of conspiracy, their only crime sharing a simple meal. Outside the courthouse, the so-called Committee for Moral Standards nailed up a petition with Belle Rowan's name, bold across the top, branding her a corrupting influence. Inside Hattie Briggs's cafe, Belle read the list of accusations: public singing teaching without license, living alone, until the words blurred beneath a wave of exhaustion. "Maybe I should leave," she whispered. "They'll never quit coming after me." Hattie slammed the coffee pot onto the counter. "You walk out and they win. Next week they'll come for a Mexican widow feeding minors. Week after that, they'll chase out the Chinese cook for serving foreign food. Where does it stop?" The argument flared in Hattie's storeroom, sacks of flour and coffee tins, standing witness to the first sharp clash between Belle and Clay Maddox. Belle announced plans for a benefit show to feed the families of the dead miners. Clay stood rigid in the doorway, his refusal written in every line of his frame. "You don't get it," he said, voice low and tight. "They won't come with papers. They'll come with guns. They'll blow out the lamps and call it an accident." Belle met his gaze, chin high. "I know fear well enough, Mr. Maddox, but silence kills quicker than bullets. Those families need food more than my caution. They need you alive. Do they? Or do they need anybody to say, this is wrong? She pressed both palms to the scarred table. I've been running from powerful men my whole life. I'm done making myself small. This isn't Boston, and these aren't theater critics. Finn Doyle and his kind are counting on us to stay scared. Her voice trembled, but didn't break. Every day we keep quiet, they grow stronger. Every injustice we swallow just makes the next one easier to force down. Clay's fists clenched. You think I don't know that? You think I sleep easy? He stopped, jaw tight, words caught like thorns, knowing what she asked. Silence filled the room until Hattie poked her head in, took one look, and backed out. At last, Clay spoke each word cautious, as a man stepping onto thin ice. Knowing that staying quiet makes me complicit, but losing you would be worse. He turned for the door. Do what you want. You always do. The door shut hard behind him. Belle sank onto a cornmeal sack, the emptiness of the back room matching the desert outside, a place where justice and love seemed equally indifferent. Sleep stayed away from both of them that night. In the livery loft, Clay lay awake while cinder shifted below the wind, carrying him back to the blizzard that had killed his men, and to every compromise since each one a grain of dust until he barely knew the man he'd meant to be. The faces of Private John Adams, only 19, and Corporal Benjamin Franklin Davies, who'd shared his last hardtack before freezing, haunted him. He'd chosen wrong once. Now he faced another choice: shield Belle by stopping her, or protect her by standing with her. Across town, Belle sat at her narrow desk, writing by candlelight. It wasn't a letter to anyone. There was no one to send it to but a note to herself. You crossed the country to escape one cage, only to find another bars of dust and ignorance instead of gossip and lace. Stay silent now, and your voice will die before you do. She set the pen aside and opened her battered Shakespeare eyes, finding the line she'd marked. Cowards die many times before their deaths. The valiant never taste of death but once. Brave words for a prince, harder for a lone woman to live. 3 days later, Marshal Hank Rourke made his move. Belle had just finished rehearsal when he entered the Copperjack, flanked by 2 Pinkerton men. With a flourish, he handed her an official-looking paper. By order of the territorial governor, he intoned, "Pending investigation of moral turpitude and incitement to disorder, you are commanded to leave Red Butte within 48 hours." Belle read the legal script, then calmly tore it in half, then quarters, until the pieces drifted to the sawdust floor like desert snow. "I don't recognize authority bought with blood money," she said clearly. Rourke's face darkened. "You just destroyed a legal document. That's a criminal act. Then arrest me. Let's have a trial. I'm sure the territorial judge would enjoy hearing about San Dimas's safety record." One Pinkerton stepped forward, but Rourke raised a hand. He leaned close, breath reeking of tobacco and whiskey. "You'll regret this, woman. One way or another, you'll learn this town belongs to those who pay for it." They left, but the threat hung like smoke. Belle's hands trembled as she swept the torn scraps into the stove and watched them burn. 20 minutes later, Clay came through the door. He read the story in her stiff shoulders and the bitter scent of scorched paper. "They came," he said, more statement than question. "With deportation papers," she answered. I declined to comply. Something shifted in Clay's face, a wall finally giving way. "Then we'd better get ready for what comes next." That single word rang louder than any promise. Belle stopped sweeping and met Clay Maddox's eyes. Clay, about that night in the Sangre de Cristo, he cut in words, spilling faster than she'd ever heard, as if they'd been locked up for years. The blizzard came out of nowhere. I was supposed to read the signs the way the birds flew, the way the horses acted. I was the scout. Keeping them safe was my job. His voice rasped like gravel. John Adams from Ohio wanted to be a teacher. Benjamin Franklin Davies, Pennsylvania boy, with a sweetheart waiting. They trusted me, and I led them straight into that storm. Belle set the broom aside and stepped closer, careful not to touch. What happened? Whiteout. Couldn't see 5 feet. He pressed his palms to his eyes. I found a cave big enough for one and tried to go back. By morning, I found them frozen together. Ben had given John his coat. They died taking care of each other while I lived because I'd found shelter first. His hands dropped, eyes raw with old grief. Every choice since I've played it safe looked away, stayed quiet, told myself it was wisdom. Truth is, it was fear. If I let them hurt you because I'm afraid of another wrong call, that would be the worst cowardice of all. Belle laid a steady hand on his arm. We all carry ghosts, Clay. The question is whether we let them guide us or bury us. He covered her hand. What ghosts follow you? She nearly pulled back, but forced herself to answer. Benjamin Harrison, a theater producer with power to ruin. I refused him, and he smeared me with lies. The ghost that haunts me isn't his name, it's my own silence. I smiled, stayed polite, tried to endure like a lady. By the time I spoke up, no one believed me. Her jaw hardened. I won't be silent again. Not for Rourke, not for anyone. They stood in the empty copperjack, 2 scarred souls recognizing their own reflections. Outside Red Butte wound down for evening merchants, shuttering doors, miners heading for the night shift. Children called home for supper, while quiet rebellion took root. So Clay said at last, a benefit show for the widows and orphans. They'll try to stop it. Then we'll be ready. He nodded. I know men former cavalry miners who've had enough. They can keep watch. And I know women who can spread the word so folks understand why we're doing this. Planning together, they discovered a partnership neither expected. As desert stars sharpened overhead, something subtle but unshakable formed between them. Not yet love, but the bond of kindred spirits determined to face the coming storm, side by side. Near midnight, the secret meeting began in Morrison's barn. A single lantern swung above miners' shopkeepers. Pastor Levi Grant and others done with San Dimas chokehold. Belle stepped forward, no longer the stage performer, but a commander in her own right. We move tomorrow night, she said firmly. While they watch the saloon for my benefit show, a crew will slip into the mine office through the old ventilation shafts. Noah Pike unrolled a rough map across a hay bale. These tunnels haven't been used since the first dig. Tight and half-collapsed, but they run straight under the administration rooms. We need proof, hidden reports, bribery records, the real accident logs, Clay added. Without that, we're just noise in the desert. Pastor Levi blessed the plan in Latin, then in English added, I've alerted my cousin with the cavalry at Fort Buchanan, but they can't act until they see federal crimes on paper. Hattie Briggs spoke from the shadows. My nephew works the telegraph. He's seen messages between Rourke and Cyrus Kane. They're scared stiff of a federal probe. That's why they're pushing to silence everyone now. Then let's give the inspectors something they can't ignore, Belle said, sweeping her gaze over the crowd. Each of us has lost someone to the mine's greed. Tomorrow we take back what's ours, not gold or silver, but the truth. The plan was stark and dangerous. While Belle sang at the copperjack to hold Rourke's attention, Clay would lead a team through the forgotten shafts. One chance to seize the evidence before Finn Doyle's Pinkertons realized the ruse. The following evening came too soon. Belle applied her stage paint with calm precision, choosing bold crimson defiance in color. Clay found her backstage carrying something wrapped in cloth. For luck, he said, revealing a small Derringer pistol. It was my mother's. She hauled it from Missouri to California and never fired it. Belle weighed the weapon heavier than it looked. Let's hope I inherit her restraint. Belle. He hesitated, then said, Don't try to be a hero. If it goes bad, I know. Same for you, she replied, tucking the pistol into a pocket sewn inside her corset. But heroes rarely follow their own advice. They stood close in the cramped space racks of costumes and painted flats around them like silent witnesses. Clay brushed a speck of powder from her cheek. After this is done. Tell me after, she said softly. We'll have time then. He gave a short nod and slipped away, leaving Belle to face the crowd. The Copperjack filled to bursting. Marshal Rourke sat front and center with 4 Pinkertons making their threat obvious. Belle met their stares with a bright, fearless smile and stepped into the light. Outside, Clay led his crew to a forgotten shaft hidden among Joshua trees, its timber frame weathered to ghost gray and tangled with tumbleweed. Quietly, they cleared the entrance and dropped one by one into the black throat of the earth. The tunnel was worse than the map had promised. Beams rotted to splinters, the ceiling in places so low they had to crawl on hands and knees. Water seepage turned the forgotten shaft into a maze of stinging mineral mud that bit at bare skin. The men crawled on elbows and knees, the air heavy with sulfur and grit. Even Jed Carver, wiry as a fence rail, had to exhale to squeeze through. Feels like being born again, only straight into hell, Noah Pike muttered. Above them, Belle Rowan sang harder than ever. Her voice soared past the Copperjack's thin walls, weaving familiar ballads into long, teasing pauses to keep every eye on her. When the songbook ran dry, she spun nursery rhymes into smoky torch tunes, making the miners howl with laughter and forcing Finn Doyle's Pinkertons to stay put and scowl. Then trouble hit below. A rotten beam groaned, snapped, and showered dirt and stone. "Move now!" barked Buck Crow, the veteran miner. The team lunged forward as the passage caved in behind them, the roar drowning out every shout. Dust filled their mouths and lungs until breathing felt like swallowing sand. When the rumble eased, only one way remained forward. Clay spat grit. "No turning back," he said, and they pushed on, following Noah's memory of the old workings, as the air thinned to a breath-by-breath struggle. At last, Clay's searching hands struck wooden planks the underside of the San Dimas administration floor. With pick and crowbar, they cut through and hauled themselves into a long-abandoned storeroom. Lantern light revealed shelves sagging with papers. Without wasting a heartbeat, they fanned out Clay toward the main office Noah, to telegraph logs the others to dusty file cabinets. What they uncovered chilled them. Ledgers showing safety gear bought but never delivered, bribe payments siphoned from miners' dues, inspectors' warnings about unstable shafts stamped and buried. Lists of outspoken miners, many already dead, tagged as accidental losses. A telegram from Cyrus Kane's Chicago board coldly approved acceptable casualties to maintain production. Pastor Levi Grant whispered, "Mother of God," as he read proof that children barely 10 had been put to work near toxic crushers. Overhead, Belle's voice finally faltered. The crowd began to stir. Marshal Hank Rourke rose his movements, deliberate as a predator. "Fine singin', Miss Rowan," he drawled, "but I reckon it's time for your finale." Belle's smile blazed. "But Marshal, the night's young, and I've yet to sing your favorite." "My favorite?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. "The one where the crooked lawman gets what's comin' to him. Folks never tire of that tune." His hand slid toward his holster just as a deep, violent boom rocked the building. It wasn't a blast from the mine, but the old tunnel collapsing, blasting air upward like a giant's breath. Dust roared through floorboards in choking clouds. Out of that haze, Clay and his crew burst from behind the bar caked with dirt, but clutching armfuls of damning records. Finn Doyle and the Pinkertons yanked their guns. Without thinking, Belle whipped the derringer from her corset and fired into the ceiling. The sharp crack stopped every heart. Patrons dove for cover. "Federal marshals are on their way," Hattie Briggs shouted from the doorway. "My nephew just got the wire. Anyone wanting to explain dead miners to Washington had better think twice." Rourke lunged, seizing Belle as a shield. Clay froze documents, spilling at his boots. For a breathless instant, the saloon was a standoff etched in gunmetal light. Belle felt the cold muzzle press her temple and forced herself to speak calm and clear. "Can courage die before the body does," she quoted, "or does it live in every choice we make to stand?" Then she went limp, dropping like a sack of grain. Rourke caught off balance, staggered. Belle fired down. The bullet tore through his foot. He howled and dropped his revolver. Clay moved in a blur, tackling the marshal, while the others disarmed the Pinkertons. It ended in heartbeats, no deaths, but Rourke would limp for life. By dawn, the federal marshals and a detachment from Fort Buchanan rode in. They seized the evidence, the prisoners, and the San Dimas offices. A cavalry captain leafed through the ledgers and shook his head. "This filth runs clear to Chicago, maybe all the way to Washington. You folks have done the country a service." When the sun climbed over the mesas, painting them blood red, Belle stood on the street she'd swept so many mornings. Her gown was torn, her hair streaked with dust, her voice little more than a rasp. Clay stood beside her just as battered. "You saved my life," she said. "You saved your own," he answered quietly. "I only helped clean up." She managed a hoarse laugh. "My hero, though heroes rarely heed their own advice." Together, they watched Pinkertons loaded into prison wagons, Rourke cursing and vowing lawsuits. For the first time in years, the mine was silent. Its engines dead, and its masters gone. "What now?" Belle asked. Clay met her eyes as though seeing past every wall they'd built. "Now we help this town heal together, if you'll have me." "Is that the speech you meant to give after it was all over?" she teased softly. "The start of it," he said. She reached for his hand in full view of the waking town. "Then let's hear the rest." Morning broke bright and strangely hushed. No whistles, no grinding oar. Red Butte exhaled for the first time in years. The funerals came first. With the mine shut and Rourke's reign finished, families finally mourned their dead. They gathered on the hilltop cemetery, wooden crosses crowding the dusty slope. Pastor Levi Grant spoke blessings in English and Spanish, while the desert wind carried the scent of sage and sorrow across a town beginning at last to breathe free. Belle stood quietly among the mourners, her throat too raw from the night before to sing. Instead, she read each name aloud, making every soul more than a statistic. Zeke Boone, beloved husband and father. Wade Flint, son of Scotland, friend to all. Cole Nash, who dreamed of building a home. Her voice was little more than a whisper, yet it carried with a force no hymn could match. From across the crowd, Clay Maddox watched how she clasped each widow's hand and bent to meet orphaned children eye to eye. Morning sunlight caught the red in her dust-dulled hair, glowing like banked embers. He'd seen her perform and fight, but this quiet mercy showed another side of the woman who had overturned his lonely life. After the service, Judge Owen Frost, commanding the Fort Buchanan detail, addressed the gathering. The Territorial Court has issued an injunction against the San Dimas Mining Company. A full federal investigation is underway. Until it concludes, the mine is under federal supervision. "What about our jobs?" Noah Pike called out. "We still need to eat. The court has appointed a temporary administrator, the judge replied. Operations will resume next week with strict safety rules. Any man willing to work under those terms will have a place. A low murmur of relief moved through the crowd. Justice was fine, but empty bellies heeded no speeches. That afternoon, cavalrymen finished cataloging the seized papers. The depth of the fraud staggered even hardened soldiers. Years of buried safety violations, bribes that reached deep into territorial offices, deaths erased from ledgers. "This Marshal Rourke is talking plenty," Judge Frost told Clay later, spitting a streak of tobacco into the dust. "Claims he's hidden more documents that'll point to bigger fish back east. He's angling for leniency. Might work men like him often land soft, but Red Butte is rid of him." When the prisoners were readied for transport to Tucson, another surprise waited. A small delegation approached Belle at the Copperjack Hattie Briggs Jed and Nora Carver, Pastor Levi Grant, and others. "We need a teacher," Nora said simply. "A real one. The children need schooling. You've already proved you can reach them." "I'm not certified," Belle answered. Neither was anyone else who tried. Hattie broke in. "But you show up. You care. That's certification enough." Belle looked from one weathered face to another. "What about my evening shows? Keep them," Jed said. "The town still needs music. But we can pay a small wage for the classroom, steady, respectable work," added Ruth Deacon, who until recently had led the campaign against her. "I misjudged you, Miss Rowan," Ruth admitted. "Perhaps we all did. Red Butte needs people with courage. I'd be honored if you'd teach my daughters." Emotion thickened Belle's already ragged voice. "I'd be honored," she said simply. Later, alone with Clay in the stable's quiet, she finally let the tears come. "A year ago, Boston hounded me out as immoral," she whispered. "Now they want me to teach their children." Clay handed her a clean handkerchief. "Truth shows itself eventually," he said. "Sometimes it just takes a mine collapse and federal troops to open eyes." Belle laughed through the tears. "Put that way, it almost sounds reasonable." Days blurred into change. The mine reopened under Noah Pike's watch as elected shift boss. Safety gear long hidden was finally handed out, wages rose a notch, and more important, were paid on time. Clay faced his own surprise. With Rourke gone, and no new marshal appointed, a delegation found him at Hattie's Cafe. Grant Steele, the mayor, spoke first. "It's temporary just until the territory sends a proper sheriff. But we need someone now, and the men trust you." "I'm no lawman," Clay said, staring at the tin star they offered. "You've kept order without bloodshed," Pastor Levi pointed out. "That already makes you better than most wearing badges out here." At length, Clay pinned the star to his vest, feeling the familiar weight of duty settle on his shoulders. From across the room, Belle watched pride and unease mixing in her eyes. The months that followed were anything but simple. A few of Marshal Hank Rourke's old allies still lurked in Red Butte, eager to stir trouble. Twice, Clay Maddox had to face down miners drunk on their new freedom and bent on settling scores. He wore the tin star now, but he refused to turn it into a weapon. "This badge is for keeping peace," he told a circle of would-be vigilantes, "not for keeping tallies. Anyone hunting revenge will answer to me first." Meanwhile, Belle Rowan poured her energy into transforming the abandoned Wells Fargo depot into a schoolhouse. With neighbors pitching in, they hauled out freight crates, built rough benches, and painted a blackboard on the wall. Her curriculum was stitched together from what she had volumes of Shakespeare and poetry newspapers borrowed from the telegraph office, even mining manuals that doubled as math texts. Children arrived hesitantly at first. Years of scattered schooling had left gaps wide as a canyon. Belle met each child where they stood, teaching letters to lanky teens who'd never held a primer, and reading stories to little ones who'd never owned a book. One evening, Clay found her slumped over a clutter of lesson papers, the lamplight catching the fatigue on her face. "You're driving yourself too hard," he said gently. "There's so much they don't know, so much they deserve to learn," she replied, lifting weary eyes. "You can't mend years of neglect in a month. I can try." Clay sat on a child-sized bench, knees to his chest. "Belle, you've already given this town more than anyone could ask. You don't have to prove a thing." "I'm not proving," she said, gesturing at the marked papers. "I'm building. Every word they read, every number they master, it's like laying stones for the future. I can't change the past, but I can shape what comes next." He studied her face, seeing through the tiredness to the fierce hope beneath. "All right. But you're taking tomorrow afternoon off? I have lessons. I'll teach them." She blinked. I can write cipher. I know some history from my army days," he said with a rare smile. "Might do the kids good to see their sheriff values learning." Next afternoon, Belle watched from the doorway as Clay awkwardly held class. He showed the children how to read animal tracks in dust, calculate a herd's water needs, and find direction by the stars. Not a standard lesson plan, but the students drank in every word. Mr. Maddox, young Luke Porter, asked, "Is it true you fought Indians?" Clay paused, choosing each syllable. "I served in the cavalry, yes. But fighting's what happens when folks stop trying to understand each other. The Apache and Yaqui know this land better than any map. We'd have done better learning from them than fighting them." It was a bold truth from a former soldier, and the children, especially Maria Morales, whose grandmother was Yaqui, lit up with pride. That evening, Clay and Belle walked along the dry creek bed as sunset flared purple and gold. A mockingbird stitched its own borrowed melodies into the cooling air. "You were good with them," Belle said. "They're good kids, just needed someone to notice," he answered. She stopped and faced him. "Like we needed someone to notice us." The words hung rich with meaning. Clay reached out, brushing a stray curl from her face. "Belle, I know," she interrupted softly. "We both carry too much past to race toward the future, but I'm glad we're heading the same direction." He took her hand, calloused fingers warm around hers. "For 12 winters I rode alone, thought it was strength. Truth is, it was fear wearing a brave face. And I performed alone, smiled alone, thinking applause could fill the emptiness," she said. She squeezed his hand. "Maybe we're both learning better." They lingered in the deepening dusk, comforted by silence. Below Red Butte's lamps flickered on like a scatter of new stars. The town had survived its fire. Now came the harder work of building a life worth keeping. The morning of their wedding dawned with a rare desert calm. No dust clouds on the horizon, a cool hush in the air. The small Catholic church, freshly whitewashed by neighbors, shone simple and bright. White tablecloths from Hattie Briggs' cafe draped the altar, and wildflowers gathered along the creek, filled mason jars lining the aisle. Belle, dressed in her best blue gown, pressed crisp by May Hollis's laundry. Nora Carver had sewn new lace to the hem and tucked pearl hairpins from her own mother into Belle's hair. "You look beautiful," Hattie said, giving the final adjustment with the sure touch of a woman who knew her own mind. "I'm terrified," Belle admitted, her voice still edged with the rasp from that night of endless singing. "Good," Hattie replied with a grin. "Means it matters." Across town, Clay readied himself in the stable, performing his own quiet pre-wedding ritual as Cinder snorted softly nearby. Clay Maddox endured his own trial before the wedding bells ever rang. Noah Pike and Jed Carver cornered him with the single-mindedness of men on a mission determined to make the dusty sheriff fit for a bride. His old black suit, bought long ago for army duties and rarely worn since, was brushed free of desert grit. "Hold still," Noah ordered, trimming Clay's stubborn hair. "I have been sleeping with horses," Clay protested dryly. "Not anymore," Jed shot back with a grin. "Hattie's nephew already moved your gear to the house on Cottonwood Street. The Miners' Fund chipped in, it's yours free and clear." 12 winters of solitude hadn't hardened Clay against the shock of such kindness. His throat tightened with a gratitude he struggled to voice. By mid-morning, the church filled. Miners came scrubbed clean, merchants wore their Sunday-best Yaqui families, arrived in bright traditional dress, and a handful of Fort Buchanan soldiers slipped in curious to see the love story that had tamed Red Butte storm. Children filed in carrying candles, Luke Porter among them, beaming with pride. At the altar, Pastor Levi Grant stood ready, his weathered face creased in a warm smile. From the loft, Lila Hollis, playing an organ that wheezed more than it sang, coaxed a heartfelt processional. Clay waited at the altar, hands steady, despite the weight of the moment. When the doors opened and Belle Rowan appeared, a soft hush fell over the room. She walked alone, no father to give her away, only the strength of her own choice. Clay saw in her eyes the same astonishment and resolve that filled his own. Their paths had been long and rough, his scarred by guilt, and wandering hers by betrayal and perseverance. Yet here they stood ready to write a new chapter side by side. Belle reached the altar and placed trembling hands in his. Clay held them firmly, grounding them both, as Pastor Levi began the ceremony in gentle accented English. The pastor's words blurred for Clay beneath the rush of blood in his ears and Belle's quiet breathing. Then came the vows. Clay's voice carried the weight of 12 silent years. "Belle Rowan," he said, "I've ridden alone through a dozen hard winter's storms, droughts, always moving so nothing and no one could matter. You changed that. You showed me courage isn't about facing danger alone. It's about standing still long enough to let someone stand beside you. I can't promise life will be easy. The desert tests everything. But I promise to ride with you through whatever comes to speak, when silence would be easier, and to stay when leaving would be safer. You are my home now, my first real home in 12 years. Tears shone in Belle's eyes, but her voice held steady. Clay Maddox. I came west, running from a life that tried to make me small. Out here I met dust and hardship, prejudice and danger, but I also met you, a man who sees me for who I choose to be. You've guarded my freedom while offering true partnership. In your quiet strength, I found the courage to be strong too. I vow to sing through our storms, to teach hope to any children we're blessed with, and to help you remember that our past may shape us, but it does not define us. You are not just my husband, Clay. You are my safe harbor." Pastor Levi's blessing rolled over them in Latin and English, but before he finished, the church erupted cheers, applause, even rebel yells from the miners. Clay turned to Belle, the words he had carried for years finally breaking free. "I've been riding alone for 12 winters," he said thickly until today. Then he kissed her tender at first, as though both feared joy might shatter if they pressed too hard. The congregation's response was anything but gentle. Rice precious in the desert flew like white confetti while the church bells rang with wild delight. Their wedding exit wasn't in a carriage, but on Cinder Clay's loyal mare, dressed in ribbons tied by Red Butte's children. Belle rode side saddle in her best blue dress, arms snug around Clay's waist, as Main Street erupted in cheers. Even those who had once scorned Belle's profession came to celebrate, tossing petals saved from funeral wreaths until the dusty street bloomed in color. The house on Cottonwood Street waited, a modest 2-room home with a small kitchen, but shaded by old cottonwood trees, a rare luxury in the Arizona sun. Someone had nailed a horseshoe above the door for luck, and Hattie Briggs' cafe provided a feast laid across sawhorses in the yard. As dusk deepened, the party drifted inside. Belle set her few belongings on a shelf, her treasured Shakespeare and Whitman, now joined by a Bible from Pastor Levy. Clay hung his sheriff's star on a wooden peg. "Justice belongs to everyone," he said quietly. "It shouldn't rest on one man's chest." And Teaching Belle asked, slipping an arm through his, "Will you help with the older boys? They need to see men who value learning." "Every day," he promised. "We'll build something new here together." At sunset, a gentle rain began. Not the violent storms that brought flash floods, but a soft, soaking shower scented with creosote and promise. They stood on their small porch watching the thirsty desert drink. "Any regrets?" Belle asked. "Only that I didn't find this sooner," Clay answered, drawing her close. "I wasn't free before, Belle. I was running. This choosing to stay, to build, to trust someone with my whole heart, this is freedom." They stepped inside as night settled, leaving the door open to the soothing rhythm of rain on the table and the bright new life beginning under their roof. Belle Rowan had tomorrow's lesson plan already set out, and beside it rested Clay Maddox's deputy badge, 2 quiet pledges of service, waiting for the dawn. Through the night, a soft rain tapped on their roof, rinsing the red dust from Red Butte's streets. By sunrise, the desert burst alive. Gold poppies, purple lupines, and white evening primroses dotted the hillsides, painting the town in colors it hadn't seen for months. Belle stood in the schoolhouse doorway as children came skipping in their chatter, bright and unafraid. Clay passed on his morning rounds, touching the brim of his hat to his wife. Belle felt the warmth of their hard-won life wrap around her like a familiar shawl. At the blackboard, she chalked 3 words: freedom, kindness, justice. Today, she told her students, "We'll learn how words can change the world." Outside, Clay moved along Main Street, greeting shopkeepers, unlocking doors, and checking that the mine's new safety measures were holding. The star on his vest flashed in the sun, but both of them knew true safety came from neighbors who now stood shoulder to shoulder. Red Butte still had battles ahead. The desert would stay harsh. Old mine owners might scheme again, and prejudice never died quickly. Yet something essential had changed. In choosing to fight for one another, the people had found their strength. And in choosing to stay and build instead of running, Belle and Clay had discovered not just love, but a shared purpose. The Wild West remained wild, but in corners like Red Butte, a new kind of civilization bloomed, fragile as desert flowers after rain, yet fierce in its will to endure. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.